Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. It's like my third time doing this lesson. Did a whole lesson and just cut off and didn't save anything, but it is what it is. Let's get straight into this lesson. So, um, going into the Renaissance paintings that the so-called white man. That's how you got the movie. The characters from the characters of the name, of the movie Ninja Turtles, Salakia, came from these Renaissance painters that painted the current images you see today. All of them been whitewashed. So how does this affect your, understanding today? How does it affect the world? How people perceive the Bible being a so-called white man book because it first started at the images. Now you got the movies, you got the theater, you got the shows, you got et cetera, right? Now this lie is so out of control that most people think, the 95% of the people in the world think this is the truth. But this started, with them so-called whitewashing the images, right? So when they would draw Moses, they would draw King David, they would draw Solomon, and so on and so forth. The Apostle Paul, they would portray them as being so-called white men, and that magic, that witchcraft, that enchantment, going back into the book of Isaiah 47:12, is heavily on the people of the world minds today. And this is why most of the world consider themselves to be Christians, right? Especially in the Americas. So let's get into this lesson. So these four Renaissance painters, matter of fact, let me prove something to you. So you won't think I'm making anything up. Right here. It says the movie Ninja Turtle characters are named after famous Italian Renaissance artists. What does the word Renaissance mean? It means rebirth. Rebirth of what? The Greek and Roman culture, because the first Edomite kingdom was the Greek Empire. And then you had something called the Greco-Roman era when you had the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. These were both Edomites. They was kind of had a coexisting kingdom in a roundabout way. And then the Romans are later in the latter end, would take over, which these are both be the same people though. But the Edomites, and you had the first Edomite kingdom, the Greeks, then that second leg, which would be the Roman Empire, which is the most, both of them are infamous, but this would be that kingdom during the Renaissance, those two kingdoms, the Edomites coming back into power, pushing their influence throughout the whole earth, using the Bible as a tool of control, and also whitewashing all the images so you can when you think about the Bible, you think it's a so-called white man book. And they created all these images, a vast amount of images, these artists, and it just wasn't these four artists, it was more of them. There's a multitude of them. So let's get into this again. It said the movie Ninja Turtle characters are named after famous Italian Renaissance artists Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. That's why they named the characters after these painters. These painters whitewashed the whole world. These was the main ones that push, you had something called the Last Supper. Every time I go to that picture, it just blanks out on me and it cuts off the lesson. So I'm not going to even go there. You can look it up on your own. And I've done lessons going into that. And you got the Mona Lisa. You got all these different pieces of artwork that they have done that's in high regard today that has been used as teaching tools and tools to indoctrinate the world. So let's go here. Then I'm going to get into this chat GPT information. Let's go here. So the so-called white man is the wicked, because this is very wicked what he has done to lie, to tell the biggest lie that's ever been told, and taking our book, our culture, and acting like they the people. It says Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, and we can precept with that Malachi chapter 1, verse 3 and 4, to tie it all in together. The border of wickedness, Esau, Edom. Who is Esau today? Which is so-called white people. And that's why the people so dumbed down. They just know these corporate names that they've been given because they've been indoctrinated. They can't shake out of it. That's how strong the indoctrination is. But the spirit been on us to wake up, to come out of that folly, to be able to understand who the Edomites were today. And they call themselves many names. They call themselves white, Jewish. They call themselves the Europeans. They call themselves British. They call themselves Australians, the Canadians, the Spanish, the French, but these are all the same people. Like the nation of Israel had 12 tribes. It's likened to the Edomites, but they still have one commonality in mind is to hate Jake and to dominate the world in wickedness, and so on and so forth. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. This not talking about your judge in traffic court. This talking about the Most High, his son. They even switched their names up on you. That's why people know the Most High Yahweh name is God. That's a great deception and witchcraft on the people. And they know the Messiah, when that name, you say that name Jesus, it invokes an image of so-called white Jesus, right? So that's a whole different vast manipulation and brainwashing and indoctrination heavy on the people's minds from all different walks of life, from all different cultures. That's how vast and powerful this indoctrination is. It says, if not, where and who is he? So if it's not the so-called white man, who the hell is it? I wanted to go to this word covered. He covered. Um, and it means to conceal. It means to conceal, and these artists was used to conceal the true images of, as the biblical figures today. Let's go into this information right here. So they conceal this information from you, and the world is in gross darkness, and they don't know what's going on. That's why you watch all these different genres of entertainment on YouTube, and everybody, when they make mockery, when they make jokes, when they tell something serious about dealing with the Bible, they always put that white Jesus up in there, or so-called, because that's an Edomite and that's an idol. That's an idol. That's really, his name is Cesare or Caesar Borgia, that was drawn, what I'm saying, by the Borgias. Salakia. That's the Borgia family I meant. But it was drawn to put the deception on over the world. Number one, let's get into this. Let's get deep into it. It says force him. So when these Edomites came into power during the Renaissance, what they did is when they went into other lands and indoctrinated the people and colonized. Colonize is just a nice way of saying rape, rob, pillage, and make them convert to being Christians. They would have to have images to do this. It says, number one, forcing the European, and this word European is new speak. These are new created words, and they create new definitions so they can control narrative. These are Edomites. But I'm just going to read it as is so we won't get too out of pocket. It says, forcing European Christianity and images. This is the images is so important to this. It says colonization and conquest. It says when Spain, remember them Edomites, Portugal, them are Edomites, France, them are Edomites, and Britain, them are Edomites. The original Britons was so-called black people. When you go into the word Brit, it means covenant. These was the Israelites that was ruling over Britain, Ireland, Scotland, etc. They ruled all of so-called Europe. Europe is a new term that they created. Colonized the Americas. They colonized them Hamites, them mud brick eating Hamites, and you got Jake mixed around among them so-called Africans. They really are Hamites. Africa is a new word. America is a new word. In parts of Asia, they brought Christianity, Christian missionaries with them. Their goal wasn't only political control, but also religious conversion. You hear this? That's why I did lessons on when they would make the Native Americans convert to Christianity, they'll put them to death. Why did they do this? And this is why most of our people call themselves Christians today. They don't know the history. They just been following this blindly because they parents, was Christians and they grandparents were Christians and so on and so forth. It says so-called white Jesus imagery. It says European art had already remade Jesus, true name Yahushua, remade Jesus, Mary, and apostles into European-looking figures, Edomites. It says light-skinned, straight hair, European features. Even though historically they were Middle Eastern Jews, and they just another new word, Middle Eastern. They was Hebrew Israelites, brown to dark-skinned flesh. These images was carried overseas in paintings, statues, and church decorations. Missionaries use them as teaching tools to teach, indoctrinate like you have today. Teaching tools. Telling indigenous people that this is God, this is salvation, and this is what you must do to believe. And that's why you have these Christians today that regurgitate these same old lines, that they've been taught that come from all this. These images was carried overseas and painters. I read that. It says forced conversion. Let's get into this. Indigenous religions were often outlawed as pagan or demonic. People were told accept Christianity with its European images of God and saints, or face punishment, slavery, or death. And a lot of people were put to death because they had integrity. They wouldn't bow down to no white Jesus, so called. Let's keep going. Psychological impact. It says cultural erasure. By replacing indigenous gods and spiritual symbols with European images, colonizers erased native identity and pride in their heritage. It says internalized superiority. The image of so-called white savior Jesus reinforced the idea that Europeans were closer to so-called God and chosen, while indigenous and so-called African peoples were less than. And you see the same thing happen today. Let's keep going. It says the lingering effects of modern Christianity. And this is what you have today. It has morphed in these different denominations of Christianity. You got Lutheran, you got Baptist, you got Presbyterian, you got Methodist, you got the Latter-day Saints, you got the Seventh-day Adventists. You know what I'm saying? The Church of there's so many different branches of it, but it goes back into the same origin. It says so-called white Jesus still dominates. This is who 95% of people in this world see in their mind. That image, the infamous image of so-called white Jesus. To this day, in many churches, especially in the Americas and Africa and colonized regions, you notice when the Edomites have colonized that, and like Japan and other places, most of them, well, that's Ammon over there, so-called Japanese. A lot of them are Christians. They have crosses on their neck, completely out of their mind, and go on, so on and so forth. Africa, you got all these different hot spots of these Christians, but the Edomites taught them this version of Christianity, and that's what they follow today out of their ignorance. It says Jesus is still shown as white European man. This shapes how believers subconsciously imagine God. That's heavy. That's heavy. So I'm just gonna not have enough time to get through everything. It says in summary, Europeans, Edomites, right, forced so-called white Jesus images and Christianity onto indigenous peoples as part of colonialization, using religion as both a weapon and a tool of control. Because Jacob started bugging out, talking about he's a super Christian, Christ is king. Have you been saved? Have you been baptized? All this is what they've been taught. It's all based into folly. Nonsense. Let's go back here. Because I don't want this thing to cut off on me again. And Lord willing, I can just basically do a lesson going into, you know, just these images. I could just go screenshot them and build like a catalog of images that you saw growing up that's in your mind. And we had to throw that stuff out of our mind, that's a part of you being reborn. It says First Maccabees 3:48, and laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. That's why you go and look at these movies. First it started with the artwork in the 14th century, then it has morphed into what you see today. You got all these whitewash movies, these TV shows. It's everywhere. They might have a little clip of so-called white Jesus on the Family Guy. It's just everywhere you look. All right, hopefully this lesson was edifying. Call Allah Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushua, Bahashim, Rahak, Kodash, Shalom.